2:02 a.m. The room is cold. Concrete. One steel table. Two chairs. On one side, a man who owns Harlem. Net worth? Over. 100 million in 1970s dollars. Untouchable. Invisible. King of a silent empire. On the other side, the United States government. They slide a folder across the table. It hits the metal with a soft thud that sounds like a gunshot. Inside that folder, the names of his brothers, his cousins, his wife, his mother, every Lucas tied by blood and by business. The agent doesn't smile. He doesn't need to. "Frank," he says, glancing at the clock on the wall, "it's 3 a.m. By 9, this goes to the U.S. attorney. Everybody gets indicted. Your whole bloodline, or..." That word hangs in the air, or you talk, the agent continues. You give us the cops. The dirty ones. The ones who let you build this little empire. You help us take their throne, we go light on your family. But you keep your mouth shut, they go down with you. All of them. Death or betrayal. The king stares at the folder. In that folder is 30 years of hunger, every hustle, every brick. Frank Lucas remembers the dirt roads of North Carolina. No shoes, no food, no money, just rage. He remembers the first time Bumpy Johnson looked him in the eye and said, "Listen to me, country boy. The loud man dies. The clever man eats. The silent man lives. Remember that if you want a throne in this city." He remembers the Sunday mornings when he sat front row at the church while kilos of 98% pure heroin blue magic moved through Harlem behind his back. He remembers the number that changed everything. 300,000. One trip to Southeast Asia, one line of soldiers, one casket full of dope smuggled from a war zone. 300,000. By 1973, he's moving heroin that's twice as pure as the mob's junk. At half the price. 7 days a week. 1 million in cash. Every single day. And now, all of it is on the table for one decision. His 100 million empire or his blood. Think about it, the agent says. You built this whole thing by outsmarting the mafia. Outplaying the system. Now's your chance to finish what you started. Give us the corrupt cops. Give us the rats in uniform. Be a kingmaker one last time. Lucas looks up slowly. There's a price for every throne, he says. You sure you can afford mine? Because what Frank's about to do in the next 4 hours will burn down an entire era. It will shatter the blue wall of silence. It will crown him a legend and brand him a rat. And the one mistake that pushed him into this corner, it started years earlier. With one man, one suit, one car too loud for a king who wanted to stay invisible. Before we get to that 3 a.m. decision and the family that nearly paid for his silence, let's rewind. Back to the day the king lost his mentor and inherited Harlem. Stay with this story. Because in the end, you'll have to answer the same question Frank did. What would you trade for your throne? July 7th, 1968. Harlem isn't alive today. It's holding its breath. Heat hangs over 125th Street like a sentence. Store gates half-rolled. Old men on milk crates quiet for once. Black Cadillacs line the block like armored coffins. Steel and chrome reflecting a neighborhood in shock. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson is dead. The man who held Harlem together with nothing but respect and calculated fear is being lowered into the ground. And with him goes 30 years of order, 30 years of structure, 30 years of a throne that kept the wolves at bay. The king is in the ground. The throne is empty. And nature abhors a vacuum. Inside the funeral home, everything is thick. Cigar smoke, cheap cologne, heavy perfume, the mix of old power and new fear. Italian silk mixing with Harlem wool mixing with police issue blue. No one laughs. No one jokes. This isn't just a funeral. This is a transfer of power without a signature. A changing of the guard without a ceremony. Frank Lucas moves through the crowd like fog. No one gives him a second look. To them, he's still just the driver. The country boy from LaGrange, North Carolina. The one who carried Bumpy's umbrella, held his hat, fetched his coffee, kept his mouth shut. A nobody. A glorified servant who got lucky enough to stand next to a legend. But the nobody is working. His eyes are active, cold, surgical. He clocks every face like he's reading a ledger, recording every flinch, every whisper, every handshake for future reference. The sharks are already circling, teeth bared beneath polite condolences. Over by the wall, two Genovese lieutenants in tailored Italian suits whisper behind manicured hands, their eyes not on the casket, but on the territory map in their heads. One keeps glancing at the casket like it's a safe they're about to crack. To them, Bumpy's death isn't tragedy. It's inventory. More corners. More numbers. More tribute coming uptown means more profit staying downtown. Behind them stands a city councilman with a folded program in his hand and a stain of fear on his collar. Bumpy financed his campaigns. Bumpy brought him votes. Bumpy kept the streets calm enough for parades and photo ops. Now his smile is gone. He's running election math in his head and not liking the totals. 3 rows back, 2 detectives sit at the edge of a pew like they own it. Shoes shined, ties tight, faces expressionless, crooked every inch of them. They took envelopes every Friday. They expect those envelopes to keep coming no matter whose name is on the note. Everybody in that room is thinking the same sentence in a different language. Who gets Harlem now? Frank stands near the aisle, close enough to see Bumpy's face for the last time, far enough to stay invisible. A flash pulls him backward in time. 2 a.m. Bumpy's living room. The old man in his pajamas, looking smaller than usual, diminished by age and illness. A cigarette burned forgotten in the ashtray between them, smoke rising toward the ceiling like prayers to gods that stopped listening years ago. The TV was on with no sound. The city glowed outside the window. Bumpy leaned back, wheezing a little, studying Frank over the haze. "You want to live long in this life?" he said, staring at the smoke with eyes that had seen everything twice. "Don't be a gangster. Be a businessman. Gangsters die young and bloody. Businessmen die old and rich. They pay for the funerals instead of starring in them." Frank sat forward on the edge of a chair he never relaxed in, hungry for knowledge the way other men hunger for money. "But how do you beat the Italians, Bump? They got the docks, the unions, the cops, the supply, everything that matters." Bumpy smiled, not happy, just knowing. The smile of a teacher watching a student finally ask the right question. "You don't beat 'em in the streets, country boy. You can't out-muscle them. You can't outgun them. You beat 'em at the source. You go where they've never thought to go. You do what they're too arrogant to imagine." Back in the funeral home, the organ coughs into a hymn. Frank keeps his face still, but inside he's replaying a different funeral. North Carolina, red dirt. His cousin swinging from a tree, shoes missing, face swollen. His father on his knees in front of a white sheriff, begging. Not for mercy, for survival. Every word costing him a piece of himself. That day, 12-year-old Frank made a vow in the back of his skull. Never again. Never powerless. Never begging. Never on his knees. That vow brought him to Harlem. That vow made him Bumpy's driver. That vow kept him silent, invisible, soaking up every move, every angle, every lesson. The service ends. People file past the casket. The mafia guys shake hands a little too firmly with each other. The cops exchange looks that say, Who's paying us next? The hustlers leak fear like sweat. Frank doesn't go home. He goes to Bumpy's apartment. The place is quiet in a way it has never been. On the table in the middle of the room, Bumpy has left his final lesson. Old ledgers, spines cracked, pages yellowed, a map of Harlem, creased and worn, territory shaded in pencil like battle lines, and one sheet of paper with a single phone number on it. Bangkok. Circled in red. Frank picks it up, reads it once. Twice. Bumpy's voice whispers back to him like a ghost giving final orders. You beat him at the source. The old king is gone. The throne is empty. The Italians are already dividing Harlem in their heads. And the nobody from North Carolina is standing over the table, staring at the key to a different kind of war. To keep Bumpy's promise, Frank had to do the one thing Harlem kings never dared: cut the Italians out at the source. 7,000 miles away, in the jungles of Southeast Asia, where a war was raging and opportunity was bleeding from every wound, most men looked at Vietnam on the evening news and saw hell. Frank Lucas looked at it and saw the source. While America watched body counts and protest marches, Frank saw supply chains and profit margins. The war wasn't tragedy to him. It was opportunity wrapped in camouflage, bleeding money from every wound. The flight to Saigon stretches 22 hours through recycled air and bad coffee. Just another black man in coach, suit pressed but not flashy, eyes steady in a way that separates tourists from predators. When the plane doors crack open, Southeast Asian heat doesn't just arrive, it attacks. Jungle humidity thick enough to choke on, mixed with jet fuel, cordite, and the metallic smell of a country bleeding to death in real time. Soldiers shuffle past in mud-stained fatigues, eyes hollow, counting days until rotation home. Helicopters lift off and land with mechanical violence, ferrying bodies both living and dead. In the middle of all that organized chaos, Frank Lucas steps onto the tarmac with singular focus burning in his chest, cut out every middleman between the poppy field and the Harlem street corner. His cousin waits near a supply depot, army uniform wrinkled with sweat and nerves. You crazy for coming here, Frank? You understand this is a war, right? People dying every day for nothing. Frank doesn't smile, doesn't flinch, just stares with the same eyes that watched a lynching in North Carolina and decided never to be powerless again. War is where the money lives, cousin. Chaos is opportunity. Set up the meeting like I asked. 5 days later, deep in the Golden Triangle, where borders blur and governments pretend blindness, Frank sits in a warehouse that smells like diesel fuel and decades of blood money. Across from him, Thai suppliers who've been moving heroin since before Frank was born. Warlords with private armies and reputations built on unmarked graves. They size him up like a stray dog that wandered into the wrong yard. One laughs openly, gold tooth catching dim light. Another lights a cigarette, deliberately blows smoke in Frank's direction like a test of respect. They quote him prices for garbage heroin, the same stepped-on, watered-down product the Italian families have been buying for decades. 10% purity if you're blessed. 15 if you're lucky. They think he's another American fool with money and no sense. Frank reaches into his duffel bag. Slowly, deliberately, he pulls out $300,000 in cash. Stacks of hundreds, bound tight, counted twice, real as gravity. Places it on the wooden table without saying a word. The laughter dies like someone cut the power. Money speaks every language fluently. Now they listen. I want 98% pure, Frank says, voice flat, businesslike, no emotion bleeding through. No cut. No middlemen. No games. Direct supply. I pay cash every time. You deliver pharmaceutical quality every time. We both get rich. They bring samples. Frank inspects them personally, cutting bricks with a pocket knife like a surgeon examining tissue. The third sample makes him pause. White. Fluffy. clean. This isn't Brown Street junk. This is medicine-grade destruction. This is blue magic waiting to be named. But raw product isn't power. Distribution is power. Frank studies the flow of war, planes departing full of weapons, returning full of the honored dead. Coffins draped in flags, protected by national grief. Nobody searches them. Nobody questions the sacred dead. The cadaver connection is born from necessity and blasphemy. Frank finds sergeants who need cash, carpenters who build false bottoms into military caskets. The same government that lynched his cousin now unknowingly smuggles his empire across the Pacific, shielded by the American flag and reverence for fallen soldiers. Weeks later, in a Harlem basement, Frank opens the first shipment. 98% pure, exactly as ordered. He brands it Blue Magic. When it hits the streets, the reaction is seismic. The mob sells 10% purity for top dollar. Frank sells 98% for half the price. Addicts know the difference instantly. Dealers abandon 20-year loyalties to the Genovese family, begging Frank for packages. Frank builds his empire like Ibm's systematic, efficient, family-operated. The country boys become regional managers, blood over business. He drives a Chevy, wears department store suits, eats Sunday breakfast with his mother while his product reshapes New York. Tonight, Frank stares at a mountain of white powder in that basement. He runs his hand over blue magic bricks. Cold. Pure. Perfect. He realizes he hasn't just bought drugs. He's bought a nuclear weapon that will vaporize the mafia's stranglehold on New York. Heavy footsteps creak the floorboards above. The basement door opens slowly. The Italians have come calling. They want to meet the nobody who just declared war on a 50-year empire. By 1972, money doesn't just flow into Harlem. It drowns the streets like a flash flood after a broken dam. $1 million a day. 7 days a week. 365 days a year. The mathematics are staggering and brutally simple. 365 million annually flowing through an invisible pipeline built by a country boy who used to shine shoes and carry umbrellas for dead kings. While the Genovese family counts their weekly take in tens of thousands, Frank Lucas counts his daily revenue in millions. The cash arrives so fast, so relentlessly, that counting machines overheat and break down from the strain. Rubber bands snap under pressure. Metal desks bow under weight. Bills stack in basements, stuffed in walls, buried in closets like dirty secrets that smell like sweat and ink and sin. Frank doesn't just collect money. He builds an empire that hides in plain sight. Apartment buildings he never visits. Laundromats that wash more than clothes. Dry cleaners that press more than suits. Nightclubs that front more than entertainment. Every legitimate business becomes another brick in the wall of a corporation that exists because nobody believes a black man from North Carolina could construct something this sophisticated, this efficient, this untouchable. The genius isn't just in the volume. It's in the personnel management. The country boys, Frank's brothers and cousins, pulled straight from the dirt roads of Lagrange, run his operation like Fortune 500 executives in tailored suits. They handle territories with spreadsheets and quotas. Weekly meetings in back rooms. Monthly projections. Accountability charts. No unnecessary violence. No street corner drama. No newspaper headlines. Just pure calculated business, executed with the precision of IBM and the ruthlessness of war itself. Family over outsiders. Blood over money. Loyalty over everything. They remember the hunger because they lived it. They understand the cost of betrayal because they know what blood actually means when it's spilled. This is where the binary opposition defines everything. Silence versus noise. Frank lives by Bumpy's code like it's scripture carved in stone. He drives a modest Chevy Impala while his competitors cruise in custom Bentleys with their names engraved on the plates. He wears conservative suits from Sears, while men like Nicky Barnes drape themselves in gold chains thick enough to anchor boats. Every Sunday morning without fail, Frank sits front row at Abyssinian Baptist Church with his mother, bowing his head in prayer, while his blue magic destroys the same streets he prays over. The contradiction doesn't trouble him. Kings don't apologize for their kingdoms, they just build them better than anyone else. Nicky Barnes represents everything Frank despises about the new generation of hustlers. Magazine covers, nightclub appearances, Mr. Untouchable plastered across the New York Times Magazine like a movie star promoting his latest film. Barnes wants the world to know he's rich, powerful, beyond the law's reach. He poses for photographers with diamond rings catching light. He gives interviews about being untouchable. He builds a throne made of spotlights and ego, never understanding that spotlights don't just attract fans and admirers. They attract badges and indictments and federal task forces with unlimited budgets and patient investigators. Frank watches from the shadows with quiet, burning disgust. At Small's Paradise one night, music blasting, champagne flowing, girls laughing too loud, Nicky stands on a couch making it rain with $100 bills like a man who thinks the laws of gravity don't apply to him. Frank leans toward one of his country boys and mutters, almost to himself, "Loud men die." Bumpy's voice echoes behind that thought like a ghost giving commentary. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. The clever man eats. The economics tell the real story of Frank's dominance. The Italian families have strangled New York for half a century, selling heroin that's barely 10% pure at premium prices. It's garbage wrapped in tradition and protected by violence and old agreements. Frank's blue magic is 98% pure, sold for half the mob's asking price. This isn't competition. This is annihilation by superior mathematics and better business models. Dealers who worked street corners for the Genovese family for 20 years switch sides overnight, abandoning old loyalties for better product and bigger profits. Territory that took the Italians decades to control evaporates in months. The old order isn't just crumbling. It's being systematically demolished by a country boy who learned to think like a CEO while everyone else was still thinking like gangsters. For 3 years, Frank stays invisible, a ghost with $100 million bank account. Then comes the night that changes everything. March 8, 1971. Alley versus Frazier at Madison Square Garden. The fight of the century. Every celebrity, every politician, every power broker in New York cramming into the arena to be seen at the event of the decade. Frank walks in wearing a $50,000 chinchilla coat that shimmers under the arena lights like liquid gold in pure arrogance. A matching hat, seats better than the mafia dons who've controlled the city for generations. For one night, the invisible man wants to be seen. For one night, he forgets Bumpy's fundamental lesson about silence and survival. For one night, vanity wins over wisdom, and he becomes the loud man. The cameras find him immediately. Flashbulbs pop like automatic weapons fire, capturing the image of a black man outshining the Italian bosses, outspending the celebrities, sitting where kings sit. Reporters ask questions nobody can answer. Who is that? Where did he come from? How does a nobody afford a coat worth more than most people's houses? The next morning, Detective Richie Roberts sits alone in a diner, eating breakfast and reading the newspaper. Page 6. There's Frank Lucas in that ridiculous coat, grinning like he owns the entire world and everyone in it. Roberts doesn't know the name yet, doesn't know the empire. But he knows the look. That's not a businessman. That's a king who just made his first fatal mistake. 3 days later, Frank notices something wrong with his perfect world. A dark sedan parked down his Teaneck Street. Tinted windows, different spot each day, but always there, always watching. Same eyes behind the glass, recording, building a case one photograph at a time. The invisible man is now visible. The ghost has been seen, and somewhere in a cramped police office, filled with cigarette smoke and cold coffee, Detective Richie Roberts opens a manila folder with one name written on the tab in permanent black ink. Frank Lucas. The hunt has begun. The siege is coming. And the king who built his throne on silence is about to learn the price of being heard. The higher the throne, the tighter the noose. Paranoia doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in like a slow leak, filling every corner until you can't breathe. By 1975, Frank wakes up every morning in his Teaneck mansion, with the taste of copper in his throat and a weight in his chest that no amount of money can lift. The walls that once felt like protection now feel like evidence. Hidden inside those walls, stuffed behind drywall and buried beneath floorboards, sits $52 million in cash. Every bill wrapped in plastic is a federal indictment waiting to be filed. Every brick of currency is a roadmap to life in a cage. The invisible man built an empire on silence. But silence has cracks, and through those cracks, the law is crawling with warrants and wiretaps and patient investigators who never sleep. The cadaver connection, once Frank's masterpiece of logistics and audacity, starts bleeding secrets like a severed artery. Military investigators in Vietnam are asking dangerous questions about coffins that weighed too much and soldiers who died with too many mysteries attached to their names. Sergeants who retired early with suspiciously fat bank accounts. Carpenters who built false bottoms into caskets draped with American flags and protected by national grief. The shield that protected Frank's empire for years is becoming the sword that will decapitate it. Detective Richie Roberts isn't just building a case anymore. He's building a cathedral of evidence, brick by brick, wiretap by wiretap, photograph by photograph, informant by terrified informant, who smell federal immunity and choose survival over loyalty. The fractures start with blood, which is the cruelest irony of all. The country boys, the brothers and cousins Frank pulled from North Carolina dirt roads and turned into millionaires, are now federal targets with bullseyes painted on their backs. Federal agents don't knock politely at dawn. They kick down doors with battering rams and flashlights and enough firepower to start small wars. Hubert, Frank's younger brother, who used to count money in the back of dry cleaners, gets arrested outside a laundromat with $30,000 in a paper bag and no explanation that holds up under federal questioning. His cousin gets indicted for conspiracy with evidence so overwhelming the public defender recommends pleading guilty before the trial even starts. Another brother gets pulled over during a routine traffic stop with 2 kilos in the trunk and a look on his face that says he knows his life just ended. The message from the government is simple and delivered with brutal efficiency: talk, or your children grow up visiting you behind bulletproof glass on Sundays. Loyalty versus self-preservation. Frank built everything on blood, believing family was thicker than water, thicker than money, thicker than fear. But blood has a price when federal prosecutors offer 20 years or immunity, prison or freedom, death or betrayal. The phones stop ringing. Sunday dinners at Mama's house become tense, silent affairs where everyone watches everyone else with suspicion growing like cancer in the room. Trust, the foundation Frank built his empire on, crumbles like wet concrete under the weight of federal pressure and human weakness. January 28, 1975, 5 in the morning. The world is still dark when Frank's fortress explodes with coordinated violence. Battering rams splinter the front door into mahogany splinters. Bullhorns shatter the silence with commands barked like weapons fire. Flashlights cut through darkness like searchlights hunting prey in a prison yard. Over 50 officers, FBI, state police, local cops who want their names in the papers, pour into the mansion with military precision and overwhelming force. They tear the house apart with systematic brutality that feels personal. Crowbars rip into walls, exposing bundles of cash stuffed into cavities like secrets buried in flesh. Sledgehammers smash through expensive tile, revealing ledgers that catalog every transaction, every name, every number, every sin committed in the name of empire. They find everything except Frank's dignity. That he keeps locked behind his eyes as they drag him out in handcuffs while neighbors watch from windows and cameras record his fall for the evening news. Hours later, in a sterile federal building that smells like disinfectant and broken dreams, the empire has been reduced to paperwork and plea negotiations. Frank sits across from prosecutors who smell blood in the water and want more than just one kingpin. They slide a folder across the table. Inside, 70 years in prison. Life without parole. The math is simple and absolutely brutal. Frank Lucas will die in a federal cage, an old man forgotten by streets that once whispered his name with respect and fear. Then they slide another piece of paper. A list. Names typed in neat rows like an execution order. Corrupt cops who collected envelopes every Friday for years. Dirty politicians who looked the other way while blue magic flooded their districts. Italian mobsters who thought they owned the city until a country boy proved them wrong. The prosecutor leans back, studying Frank's face for cracks. "You can die a legend in prison, Frank," he says quietly, almost sympathetically. "Or you can live as a rat in witness protection. Your call." Frank stares at the list. His finger traces down the names slowly, stopping on one that burns hotter than all the others, Detective Trupo. The dirty cop who took envelopes, who looked the other way, who helped him stay invisible for years when invisibility was the only thing keeping him alive and free. Every name on that paper represents a relationship built on money and mutual corruption. Every name represents a betrayal waiting to happen, a life about to be destroyed by his words. The price of a throne is paid in blood, but the price of keeping your life is paid in loyalty. The invisible man who built an empire on silence now has to choose, die a king or live as a rat. What will he choose? The moment Frank Lucas opened his mouth in that federal courtroom, the king died. The survivor was born. This wasn't a death marked by gunshots or funeral processions, but by the scratching of a government pen on a cooperation agreement. The man who built an empire on silence became the loudest voice in the federal justice system. He became the very thing Bumpy Johnson warned him never to become: a rat. But Frank didn't just talk. He demolished everything. His testimony was a nuclear weapon detonating in slow motion through the corrupt infrastructure of New York City. Wearing simple gray suits that made him look like an accountant instead of a king, Frank methodically dismantled the network he helped build. Over 100 convictions followed in his wake like bodies after a massacre. Dirty cops who collected envelopes every Friday suddenly faced federal indictments that destroyed pensions and marriages. Detective Trupo, the corrupt cop who helped him stay invisible for years, fell like all the rest. Italian mobsters who thought Omert made them untouchable watched their organizations crumble under the weight of Frank's photographic memory. Politicians who smiled at fundraisers while taking bribes saw their careers incinerated on the witness stand. Frank wasn't moving heroin anymore. He was moving information. And the currency was his family's freedom. purchased with other people's lives. The philosophical cost was heavier than any prison sentence could ever be. King versus survivor. Frank saved his family from the full wrath of the federal government, but he lost the only currency that mattered more than money in Harlem: respect. The code is absolute, carved in stone, enforced by violence and memory. You can steal, you can kill, you can destroy entire neighborhoods with poison, but you never, ever talk. Frank talked. Witness protection became a suburban exile, a different kind of prison with better furniture and worse isolation. The man who once commanded armies and moved millions in cash daily was now just another middle-aged neighbor mowing a lawn in an anonymous town where nobody knew his name or cared about his history. The most dangerous man in Harlem, reduced to arguing about property lines with strangers and watching cable television alone at night. Legend versus life. He chose life. But what kind of life requires erasing yourself completely to survive it? The reality check arrived slowly, painfully, delivered by journalists and federal agents who questioned every number, every story, every claim. How much of Frank's legend was truth? How much was myth wrapped in Hollywood marketing and a country boy's need to be remembered as more than just another hustler? Federal agents estimated his operation was worth millions, not the 100 million Frank claimed in interviews. Significant, yes. Impressive, certainly. But not the empire of legend. The cadaver connection, those coffins filled with heroin and draped in American flags, remains debated by investigators who can't find definitive proof it happened exactly as Frank described. Some say it was exaggerated, a legend that grew larger than the facts. But the impact was undeniable. The Blue Magic brand was real. The war with the Italian families was real. The bodies destroyed by his product were real. The convictions he delivered were real. The fall was spectacular and complete. Years passed like water through open hands. Harlem moved on without him, as streets always do, finding new kings and new drugs and new legends to whisper about in doorways and corner stores. Frank grew old, wheelchair-bound, watching the modern world from a window that didn't remember his name. The crack epidemic destroyed the neighborhoods his heroin once flooded, replacing one poison with another, one generation of addicts with the next. Hip-hop became the new language of the streets, and the new generation knew Jay-Z and Biggie, not Bumpy Johnson. They knew Pablo Escobar and El Chapo, not Frank Lucas. The invisible man who built an empire on silence was forgotten by the very streets he once ruled with discipline and ruthless efficiency. In his final years, Frank held an old photograph with hands that trembled from age and regret. Black and white, faded at the edges, creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. Two men in suits standing outside a Harlem nightclub, looking like they owned the world because for a moment, they did. Bumpy Johnson and Frank Lucas. The mentor and the student. Two kings separated by time and choices. One dead with his dignity intact, his legend untarnished, his name still spoken with reverence in the shadows. One alive but diminished, carrying the weight of choices made at 3 a.m. in a cold federal room where survival meant betrayal and life meant losing everything that made life worth living. Frank Lucas walked away with his life. But did he walk away with his soul? He chose survival over legend, family over respect, tomorrow over today, breathing over honor. He beat the chair, he beat the Italians, and he beat the system, but he lost his throne. The price of a throne is paid in blood. But the price of keeping your life is paid in loyalty, reputation, and pieces of yourself you can never get back. So here's the question that haunted Frank until his last breath. The same impossible question from that 3 a.m. room, with prosecutors and lists and 70 years hanging in the balance, in that cold federal building with everything on the line. What would you have chosen? Your throne or your life? Your legend or your family? Would you die a king in a cage or live as a ghost in exile? Because in the end, Frank learned what Bumpy never told him. Some prices are paid in blood, but the highest prices are paid in pieces of yourself you can never get back.